I thought I was just an ordinary woman, living a quiet life, but little did I know that the sale of a piece of land would turn my world upside down and put me in a battle for my own safety. Let me tell you how I went from being a loving mother to someone who had to fight back to protect everything I've worked for. My name is Martha, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen it all. I thought I understood the world, understood people, understood my own children. God, how wrong I was. How naive I was to believe that blood meant loyalty, that family meant safety, that the children I raised with my own hands would never turn those same hands against me. For 43 years, I shared my life with Robert, my husband, my partner, my best friend. We built something together on that old family property of his. Not just a house, but a home, a life, a legacy. When Robert passed away 3 years ago, I felt like half of my soul had been ripped away. The silence in that house was deafening. The emptiness was suffocating, but I refused to crumble. I refused to become one of those widows who just sits in her chair, waiting for death to come knocking. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5:30, just like I always had. I'd make my coffee, black, the way Robert taught me to drink it during those early farming days when we couldn't afford cream. I'd sit on the front porch and watch the sun come up over the fields, and I'd tell myself that I was still here for a reason. I still had purpose. I still had fight left in me. I took pride in my independence. While other women my age were moving into assisted living or depending on their children for everything, I was still driving myself to the grocery store, still tending to my garden, still managing my own finances. I balanced my checkbook every month to the penny. I paid my bills on time. I kept that house spotless, just the way Robert and I always did. I wasn't going to be a burden on anyone, especially not my children. Patricia and Michael, my daughter and son. I thought I had raised them right. I thought I had taught them values, respect, the importance of hard work and honesty. Robert and I, we sacrificed so much for those kids. We went without so they could have what they needed. We worked extra jobs to pay for their education, their activities, their dreams. And I truly believed, that they had grown into good people, decent people who would never hurt their own mother. How wrong I was. How blind I was to what they were becoming. The decision to sell Robert's family farm wasn't easy. That land had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had worked those fields with his bare hands. His father had built the first barn with timber from their own woods. Robert himself had spent countless hours walking those property lines, planning, dreaming, building our future there. But after he died, I couldn't manage it anymore. The maintenance, the taxes, the sheer physical demands of keeping that much property, it was too much for one woman my age. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I sold it. I sold Robert's family legacy for $350,000. It wasn't about greed. It wasn't about wanting luxury. It was about securing my future, about making sure I could live independently for the rest of my days without becoming a financial burden on my children or ending up in some state-run facility where they warehouse the elderly. I kept the sale quiet. I didn't announce it to the family. I didn't ask for their permission or their blessing. Why should I have? It was my property, my decision, my life. Robert had left everything to me, and I had every legal right to do what I thought was best. Besides, I told myself, this was between me and my financial security. My children had their own lives, their own families, their own concerns. They didn't need to be involved in my business decisions. God, how naive I was. How foolishly I underestimated their greed. The first sign of trouble came about 2 weeks after the sale was finalized. Patricia showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. Patricia never just dropped by. She's always been a planner, always calling ahead, always scheduling visits like business appointments. But there she was, standing on my front porch with that smile, that sickeningly sweet smile that I should have recognized as fake from the moment I saw it. "Hi, Mom," she said, bouncing on her toes like she was excited about something. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by, just to check on you." In the neighborhood. My house is 15 miles from town, down a winding country road that doesn't lead anywhere else. Nobody is ever in my neighborhood unless they're coming specifically to see me. But I invited her in, made her coffee, offered her the cookies I had baked that morning. I was happy to see her. My daughter, my firstborn, the little girl I had nursed and rocked and sung to sleep. I was always happy to see her. We sat in my living room, making small talk about her kids, her husband, her job at the insurance office. Normal mother-daughter conversation. But I could feel her watching me, studying me, like she was looking for something. Her eyes kept wandering around the room, taking inventory of my furniture, my belongings, like she was appraising everything. Then she started asking questions, innocent questions at first. "How are you managing financially, Mom? Are you okay with money? Do you need any help with bills?" She was being so caring, so concerned. What loving daughter wouldn't want to make sure her elderly mother was financially secure? But then the questions got more specific, more pointed. "I noticed the for sale sign is gone from the farm property. Did it sell? When did that happen? How much did you get for it?" That's when I felt the first chill run down my spine. The way she asked, not with curiosity or casual interest, but with this hungry intensity that made my stomach turn. Like she had been thinking about this, planning this conversation, rehearsing these questions. I tried to deflect. I told her the sale was recent, that I was still processing all the paperwork, that it was complicated. But Patricia wasn't satisfied with vague answers. She kept pushing, kept prying, kept asking for details. How much money? Where was I keeping it? What were my plans for it? "I'm just worried about you, Mom," she said, reaching across to pat my hand. But her touch felt cold, calculating. "You're getting older, and I want to make sure you're making smart decisions with your money. Maybe you should let Michael and me help you manage it. For your own protection." For my own protection. Those words still make my blood boil. The audacity of it, the manipulation. My own daughter, sitting in my living room, drinking my coffee, eating my cookies, and already plotting how to get her hands on my money. Already treating me like I was some senile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own finances. I told her firmly that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, that I had been doing so successfully for over 40 years of marriage and 3 years of widowhood. I thanked her for her concern, but made it clear that my financial decisions were mine alone to make. The sweet smile faltered for just a moment, just long enough for me to see something else underneath, something cold and calculating and angry. But then she recovered, put the smile back on, and changed the subject. She stayed another hour, acting like the loving daughter, but I could feel the tension in the air. I could sense that this conversation was far from over. I was right. 2 days later, Michael showed up. My son, my baby boy, now 38 years old and acting like he owned the world. Michael had always been entitled, even as a child. If Patricia wanted something, she would work for it, plan for it, earn it. But Michael expected things to be handed to him. He expected the world to accommodate his desires simply because he existed. He didn't even knock. He used his key, The emergency key I had given him years ago, and walked right into my house like he lived there. I was in the kitchen, preparing my lunch, when I heard the front door slam shut and his heavy footsteps in my hallway. "Mom!" he called out, his voice echoing through the house. "We need to talk." The tone of his voice immediately put me on edge. This wasn't a loving son coming to visit his mother. This was a demand, an order. I walked into the living room to find him pacing back and forth, his face red with anger, his hands clenched into fists. "Patricia told me about the farm," he said without any greeting, without any pretense of politeness. "She said you sold it and you're keeping secrets from us. Is that true, Mom? Are you really going to sit there and lie to your own children?" The accusation hit me like a slap across the face. Lie to my own children? I had never lied to them about anything important in their entire lives. I had always been honest, sometimes brutally so, because I believed they deserved the truth. And here was my son, standing in my living room, accusing me of deception because I had made a private business decision without consulting him. "I didn't lie to anyone," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I made a personal decision about my own property. I'm not required to discuss my financial affairs with anyone, including my children." Michael's face got even redder. "Your financial affairs? Mom, that farm was part of our family heritage. Dad's family had that land for generations, and you just sold it without even telling us? Without giving us a chance to buy it ourselves or have any say in the decision. Your father left everything to me," I reminded him. "The land, the house, all of it. He trusted me to make the right decisions, and that's exactly what I did. I sold property that I could no longer maintain in order to secure my financial future. That's called being responsible." "Responsible?" Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a cold, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Mom, you're 64 years old. You're not gonna live forever. That money should be protected for your family, for your grandchildren. You shouldn't be making these kinds of decisions without talking to us first." The implication was clear. I was too old, too incompetent, too unreliable to be trusted with my own money. In Michael's mind, I was already a burden, already a problem to be managed. And that money, my money, earned from the sale of my property, was already his in his twisted thinking. "I want to know how much you got for it," he continued. "And I want to know what you're planning to do with the money. Patricia and I have been talking, and we think you should set up a trust fund or something. So the money is protected, and we can help you make smart investments. We can help you." There it was again, that same patronizing language Patricia had used. Both of my children, plotting together, planning how to get control of my money while pretending it was for my own good. I told Michael the same thing I had told Patricia, that my financial affairs were private, that I was perfectly capable of managing my own money, and that I didn't need or want their help. I asked him to leave, to give me time to process this conversation and his demands. But Michael didn't leave. Instead, he sat down on my couch like he was settling in for a long stay. "I'm not going anywhere until we figure this out, Mom. We're family. We should be making these decisions together." That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a simple disagreement that we could resolve with conversation. This was the beginning of something much worse. Over the next few weeks, both Patricia and Michael began what I can only describe as a campaign of harassment. They called me multiple times every day, always with the same questions, always with the same demands. They showed up at my house unannounced, sometimes together, sometimes separately, always pressuring me for information about the money. They tried different approaches, different tactics. Sometimes they were sweet and caring, telling me how much they loved me and how worried they were about my well-being. Other times they were angry and confrontational, accusing me of being selfish and secretive. They enlisted their spouses, my son-in-law and daughter-in-law, to call me with their own versions of the same message. I needed to share the money with the family for everyone's good. They even tried to involve my grandchildren. Patricia brought her teenage daughter over one afternoon and had her ask me about college funds and whether Grandma was going to help pay for her education. The manipulation was so obvious, so calculated, that it made me sick to my stomach, using my love for my grandchildren as a weapon against me. But the worst part was how they started treating me like I was incompetent. They questioned every decision I made, every purchase, every financial choice. When I bought a new refrigerator to replace my 15-year-old one that had finally died, Michael accused me of wasting money on unnecessary luxuries. When I hired a lawn service to help maintain my property, Patricia lectured me about being taken advantage of by unscrupulous contractors. Everything I did was wrong in their eyes. Every choice I made was evidence that I couldn't be trusted with my own money. They were building a case against me piece by piece, trying to establish that I was mentally incompetent so they could justify taking control of my finances. The psychological pressure was devastating. These were my children, the people I loved more than anyone else in the world, and they were treating me like an enemy. They were making me doubt myself, making me question my own judgment, making me feel like maybe I really was too old and too foolish to manage my own life. But I held firm. I refused to give in to their demands. I refused to share details about my finances or to let them have any control over my money. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and endured too many losses to let anyone, even my own children, take away my independence and security. That's when things turned violent. It was a Thursday morning in late September. I remember the date because it was the anniversary of Robert's first heart attack, the one that should have warned us about the massive one that would take his life 2 years later. I was feeling emotional, missing my husband, wishing he was still there to help me deal with our children's greed and manipulation. Michael showed up at my house around 10 o'clock, already angry before he even walked through the door. I could see it in his face, the way he was breathing, the tension in his shoulders. He was like a bomb ready to explode, and I was his target. "I've had enough of this, Mom," he said, not even bothering with a greeting. "Patricia and I have been patient with you, but you're being ridiculous. We know you got at least $300,000 for that farm, and we know you're sitting on all that cash like some kind of miser." "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady, "I've already told you that my finances are not your concern. I'm perfectly capable of—" "No!" he shouted, slamming his fist on my kitchen table so hard that my coffee cup jumped. "You're not capable. You're an old woman who doesn't understand modern finances or investments or any of that stuff. You're going to get scammed or waste it all, and then what? Then you'll come crying to us when you need help, and we'll be the ones who have to take care of you." The rage in his voice was terrifying. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a stranger, someone consumed by greed and entitlement and fury that I wasn't giving him what he wanted. But I refused to be intimidated. I refused to back down. "Lower your voice," I said firmly. "This is my house, and I won't be shouted at in my own home. If you can't speak to me respectfully, then you need to leave." That's when he snapped. That's when my son, the little boy I had rocked to sleep and comforted through nightmares and cheered for at baseball games, became someone I didn't recognize, someone who scared me. He grabbed me by the shoulders. his fingers digging into my flesh so hard I knew there would be bruises. He shook me hard, my head snapping back and forth like a rag doll. "You're gonna tell me where that money is," he snarled, his face inches from mine. "You're going to stop playing these games, and you're gonna do what's right for this family." I tried to pull away from him, but his grip was too strong. I'm not a large woman. I've never been more than 130 pounds soaking wet. And Michael is 6'2" and works construction. The physical disparity between us was overwhelming. "Let go of me," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Michael, you're hurting me. Let go." But he didn't let go. Instead, he shook me harder, and I could feel something in my chest give way. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through my ribs, and I gasped, struggling to breathe. "Tell me where the money is," he shouted again. "I'm tired of your games. I'm tired of you acting like you're better than us, like you don't need your family." The pain in my chest was getting worse, spreading across my entire torso. I realized that something was seriously wrong, that Michael had actually injured me. My own son had just physically assaulted me and broken my ribs. "Michael, stop," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "You're hurting me. Something's wrong." Finally, he seemed to realize what he had done. He let go of me so suddenly that I collapsed into my kitchen chair, clutching my chest and trying to breathe through the pain. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me with this look of shock and horror on his face, like he couldn't believe what he had just done. But then the shock faded and the anger came back. Instead of apologizing, instead of helping me or asking if I was okay, he pointed his finger at me like I was a naughty child. "This is your fault," he said. "This wouldn't have happened if you had just been reasonable, if you had just shared the money like a normal person instead of being so selfish and secretive." Then he walked out. He left me sitting there, injured and in pain, and he walked out of my house like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just physically assaulted his own mother. Like breaking my ribs was somehow my fault for not giving him access to my money. I sat in that kitchen chair for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My son, my baby boy, had just attacked me. He had put his hands on me in anger, injured me, and then blamed me for it. The little boy I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally, had just shown me that he was capable of violence against his own mother. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. My heart was breaking in ways I didn't know were possible. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about who my children really were, about the people they had become when they thought they could get away with it. But through the pain and the heartbreak, I felt something else growing inside me. Anger, pure, white-hot anger at what my children were doing to me, at how they were treating me, at the assumption that they could intimidate and abuse me into giving them what they wanted. I called 911. My hands were shaking as I dialed, partly from the pain in my chest and partly from the emotional trauma of what I was about to do. I was about to report my own son for assault. I was about to have him arrested, but I knew I had no choice. If I didn't stand up for myself now, if I didn't draw a clear line in the sand, this would only get worse. The dispatcher was professional and kind. She asked me if I needed an ambulance, and I said yes. She asked me if the person who had hurt me was still in the house, and I said no. She asked me if I wanted to press charges, and without hesitation, I said yes. The paramedics arrived first. Two young men who were probably close to Michael's age, gentle and respectful, as they helped me into the ambulance. They confirmed what I already knew. I had 3 broken ribs on my left side, probably caused by the violent shaking and gripping that Michael had subjected me to. The police officers arrived while I was being loaded into the ambulance. I gave them my statement, told them exactly what had happened, described Michael's assault in detail. They took photos of the bruises on my shoulders where his fingers had dug into my flesh. They wrote down everything I said, treating me with the respect and seriousness that my own son had denied me. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed the broken ribs and treated me for the trauma. They asked me the same questions the police had asked, and I gave them the same answers. Yes, my son had done this to me. Yes, I wanted to press charges. Yes, I was in fear for my safety. The hardest part was calling Patricia to let her know what had happened. I thought, I hoped, that when she heard that Michael had physically assaulted me, that he had broken my ribs, she would be horrified. I thought she would immediately take my side, condemn her brother's actions, and support my decision to have him arrested. I was wrong. "Mom, what did you do?" Those were her first words when I told her what happened. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm so sorry this happened to you." But what did you do? Like this was somehow my fault, like I had provoked my own assault. "I didn't do anything," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Your brother came to my house, demanded information about my finances, and when I refused to give it to him, he physically attacked me. He broke my ribs, Patricia. Your brother broke your mother's ribs." "Well, you must have said something to set him off," she replied. "Michael wouldn't just attack you for no reason. What did you say to him? What did you do to make him so angry?" The victim blaming was devastating. My own daughter, hearing that her brother had physically assaulted me, was more concerned with defending him than with supporting me. She was more interested in finding ways to make this my fault than in acknowledging that what Michael had done was completely unacceptable. "I told him the same thing I told you," I said, "that my financial affairs are private and that I don't need anyone's help managing my money. That's all I said. That's what your brother considers grounds for violence." Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe she was finally processing the reality of what had happened. But when she spoke again, her words cut me to the bone. "Mom, maybe this wouldn't have happened if you had just been more open with us about the money. We're your children. We have a right to know what's going on with the family finances. If you had just included us in these decisions from the beginning, none of this would have happened." There it was, my daughter, blaming me for my own assault because I had refused to give my children control over my money. In her mind, Michael's violence was justified because I had been secretive and unreasonable. I had brought this on myself by having the audacity to maintain my financial independence. I hung up on her. For the first time in my life, I hung up on one of my children. I couldn't listen to any more victim blaming, any more justification for violence, any more attempts to make me responsible for my son's criminal behavior. Michael was arrested that evening. The police found him at his apartment and charged him with assault and battery against an elderly person. He spent the night in jail, which was exactly where he belonged. I felt no guilt about it, no regret. My son had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions. But even from jail, even facing criminal charges, Michael showed no remorse. When his lawyer called me to discuss a plea deal, the message was clear. If I would just drop the charges and give him access to my money, we could put this whole misunderstanding behind us. A misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it. My son breaking my ribs because I wouldn't give him my money was just a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a financial settlement. I told the lawyer exactly what he could do with his plea deal proposal. I was going forward with the charges. Michael was going to face the full consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to be bought off or intimidated into dropping the case. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life. not just because of the physical pain from my injuries, though that was considerable. The broken ribs made it difficult to sleep, difficult to breathe deeply, difficult to do many of the daily activities I had always taken for granted. But the emotional pain was so much worse. I felt completely alone. My children, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, had revealed themselves to be greedy, manipulative, and violent. They had shown me that they valued my money more than my well-being, that they were willing to hurt me physically and emotionally to get what they wanted. The isolation was crushing. Patricia stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped having any contact with me at all. She had chosen Michael's side, had decided that supporting her violent brother was more important than maintaining a relationship with her injured mother. My grandchildren, who used to call me regularly and visit on weekends, suddenly disappeared from my life. Patricia had clearly poisoned them against me, told them some version of events that made me the villain in this story. Even friends and neighbors who heard about what happened seemed to take sides. Some were supportive, horrified that my own children would treat me this way. But others seemed to think that there must be more to the story, that I must have done something to deserve what happened. The assumption was that children don't just attack their parents without provocation, so I must have been hiding something, must have been unreasonable or unfair in some way. The judgment from others was almost as painful as the betrayal from my children. I found myself defending my decision to press charges, explaining over and over again that I had every right to manage my own finances, that I had done nothing wrong by selling my property and keeping the details private. But through all the pain and isolation and judgment, something else was growing inside me, something that felt foreign at first, but gradually became stronger and clearer. It was anger, pure, righteous anger at the injustice of what was happening to me. I was angry at Michael for his violence, for thinking he had the right to put his hands on me in anger. I was angry at Patricia for her victim blaming, for choosing greed over family loyalty. I was angry at the assumption that being elderly meant being incompetent, that being a mother meant sacrificing my own autonomy for my children's desires. But most of all, I was angry at myself for being so naive, for believing that blood relations meant automatic loyalty, for raising children who could become so selfish and entitled that they would hurt their own mother for money. That anger became my strength. It gave me the resolve to see the criminal case through to the end, to refuse all attempts at negotiation or compromise. Michael had committed a crime against me, and he was going to pay for it. The trial was a nightmare. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to Michael's lawyer try to paint me as a vindictive old woman who was exaggerating her injuries and unfairly persecuting her own son was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. They tried to make it seem like the assault was just a family disagreement that had gotten out of hand, that I was being overly dramatic by pressing charges. But the evidence was clear. The medical records showing my broken ribs, the photographs of the bruises on my shoulders, the 911 call where I could be heard struggling to breathe while describing what had happened, the testimony of the paramedics and police officers who had responded to my call. Michael took the stand in his own defense, and I watched my son lie under oath. He claimed that I had fallen and injured myself, that he had never touched me, that I was making up the assault story to get back at him for questioning my financial decisions. He painted me as a vindictive, possibly senile old woman who was using the legal system to punish her children for caring about her welfare. Listening to those lies, watching him perform this act of innocence and victimhood, I realized that I didn't know this person at all. This wasn't the son I had raised. This was a stranger wearing my child's face, someone capable of violence against his own mother and then lying about it to avoid consequences. The jury didn't believe him. They found him guilty of assault and battery, and the judge sentenced him to 6 months in jail plus 2 years of probation. It wasn't enough, in my opinion, but it was something. It was acknowledgement that what he had done to me was criminal, that being someone's son didn't give him the right to assault his mother. Patricia didn't attend the trial. She didn't support me, didn't testify on my behalf, didn't even acknowledge that her brother had done something wrong. Her absence spoke volumes about where her loyalties lay, about who she really was beneath the facade of the caring daughter. After Michael was sentenced, I thought the nightmare might be over. I thought that maybe, with the legal consequences settled, we could begin to repair our family relationships. Maybe my children would realize what they had done, would apologize, would try to make amends. I was wrong again. Instead of remorse, I got more anger. Patricia finally called me, but only to berate me for destroying the family by sending her brother to jail. She accused me of being cruel and vindictive, of choosing money over family, of ruining Michael's life over a minor disagreement. A minor disagreement. That's what she called her brother breaking my ribs. "You could have just given us some of the money," she said during that awful phone call. "None of this had to happen. Michael never would have gotten so upset if you had just been reasonable from the beginning." There it was again, the victim blaming, the assumption that I was responsible for my own assault because I had refused to hand over my money to my greedy children. In Patricia's mind, Michael's violence was justified, and my refusal to be financially controlled was the real crime. "Your brother broke my ribs," I reminded her, my voice shaking with rage. "He put his hands on me in anger and injured me, and you're defending him. You're blaming me for my own assault." "He was just frustrated," Patricia replied. "You were being so stubborn and secretive, and he lost his temper. It's not like he meant to hurt you seriously." Not like he meant to hurt me seriously, as if breaking my ribs was somehow acceptable because the violence could have been worse, as if there was some level of physical assault against one's mother that was understandable and forgivable. That phone call was the end of any hope I had for reconciliation with Patricia. She had made her choice, had chosen to defend violence against me rather than acknowledge that what her brother had done was wrong. She had shown me that she valued family loyalty to an abuser more than justice for a victim, even when that victim was her own mother. I changed my phone number after that call. I couldn't bear to receive any more calls blaming me for my own assault, any more attempts to make me responsible for my children's choices. I needed peace, needed space to heal, needed protection from the ongoing emotional abuse that my own family was inflicting on me. The isolation that followed was both devastating and necessary. I had to rebuild my life without my children, without my grandchildren, without the family support system I had always taken for granted. But I also had to learn to live without the constant stress and manipulation that had been poisoning my life for months. Slowly, very slowly, I began to heal. Not just physically, though the broken ribs did eventually mend, but emotionally, spiritually, I began to reclaim myself. I began to remember who I was before my children's greed and violence had nearly destroyed me. I was Martha, a woman who had survived the loss of her husband and built a life of independence and dignity. I was someone who had worked hard, saved money, made responsible decisions about my future. I was a person worthy of respect and kindness, not manipulation and abuse. The money from the farm sale became the foundation for something I had never thought possible: true freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to consider anyone else's needs or desires when making decisions about my resources. I didn't have to worry about whether my choices would please my children or meet their expectations. I used some of the money to make my house more comfortable and accessible for aging. I installed grab bars in the bathroom, upgraded the heating system, bought a more reliable car. These weren't frivolous purchases. They were investments in my independence, insurance that I could continue living on my own terms for as long as possible. But the most meaningful use of the money was something I had been planning for years, something I had promised my sister Susan before she died. Susan had struggled with addiction for most of her adult life, cycling in and out of treatment programs, homeless shelters, and brief periods of sobriety. She had died alone, broke, and forgotten by most of our family. Before she passed, I had promised Susan that if I ever had the means, I would find a way to help other women who were fighting the same battles she had faced. Women who were trying to overcome addiction, trying to rebuild their lives, trying to find hope when everything seemed hopeless. With the farm money, I was finally able to keep that promise. I established the Susan Hope Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing housing, treatment, and support services for women in recovery. It wasn't a huge operation. I didn't have millions to work with, but it was something real, something that could make a difference in women's lives. Working with the foundation gave me purpose again, gave me a reason to get up every morning that had nothing to do with my children's greed or society's expectations of elderly widows. I was helping women who had been written off by their families, forgotten by society, dismissed as hopeless cases. I was giving them what I had always had but had taken for granted, a second chance. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children had been so desperate to get their hands on my money, so convinced that they deserved it more than I did, that they had been willing to attack me for it. But by keeping it away from them, by refusing to let their greed control my decisions, I had been able to use that money for something truly meaningful. Instead of funding my children's sense of entitlement, the farm sale was now funding hope for women who had lost everything. Instead of enabling Michael and Patricia's assumption that they were owed their mother's resources, the money was providing resources for women who had never expected anything from anyone. It felt like justice. It felt like redemption. It felt like the right ending to a story that had begun with so much pain and betrayal. About a year after Michael's trial, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something made me open it. Maybe curiosity, maybe hope that he had finally come to his senses and was ready to take responsibility for what he had done. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on prison stationery. In it, Michael acknowledged for the first time that he had assaulted me, that he had been wrong to put his hands on me in anger. He admitted that his behavior had been motivated by greed and entitlement, that he had convinced himself he deserved access to my money simply because he was my son. He wrote about the anger management classes he was taking in prison, about the therapy sessions that were helping him understand how his thinking had become so distorted. He talked about the other inmates who had shared their own stories of family violence, about how many of them had similar justifications for their crimes. But the most important part of the letter was his acknowledgement that I had been right to press charges, right to refuse to drop the case, right to insist that he face consequences for his actions. He said that being arrested and prosecuted had probably saved our relationship because it had forced him to confront the reality of what he had become. I was turning into someone who thought violence was an acceptable way to get what I wanted, he wrote. If you hadn't stopped me, if you hadn't shown me that there were consequences for hurting you, I probably would have kept escalating until I did something even worse. The letter included an apology, not just for the physical assault, but for months of manipulation and emotional abuse. He apologized for trying to make me feel incompetent and irresponsible, for pressuring me to give up my financial independence, for treating me like I owed him something simply because I was his mother. Most importantly, he apologized for bringing Patricia into his schemes, for poisoning her against me, for turning what should have been a private disagreement between mother and son into a family-wide campaign of harassment and manipulation. Reading that letter, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not forgiveness, not yet, but relief that somewhere inside the violent stranger who had attacked me, my real son still existed. The Michael who wrote that letter was someone I recognized, someone who was capable of growth and change and genuine remorse. I wrote back, not to forgive him, not to promise that everything would go back to the way it was, but to acknowledge his letter and his efforts to change. I told him about the foundation, about how I was using the farm money to help other people instead of funding my children's entitlement. I told him that if he was serious about changing, about becoming a better person, then I was willing to consider rebuilding our relationship when he was released. But I also made it clear that things would never be the same between us. He had shown me that he was capable of violence against his own mother, and I would never forget that. He had revealed a side of himself that was ugly and dangerous, and earning back my trust would take years of consistent changed behavior. The letter from Patricia came 6 months later, but it was very different from Michael's. Where Michael had taken full responsibility for his actions and acknowledged the pain he had caused, Patricia's letter was full of excuses and justifications. She wrote about how difficult the whole situation had been for her, how torn she had felt between her mother and her brother. She talked about the stress of having a brother in prison, about how hard it had been to explain to her children why Uncle Michael was locked up. But she never once acknowledged that she had been wrong to blame me for my own assault. She never apologized for defending Michael's violence or for cutting me out of her life when I refused to drop the charges. She never took responsibility for her role in the months of harassment and manipulation that had led up to the assault. Instead, she suggested that we could put this whole unfortunate incident behind us and move forward as a family. She proposed that I could help with Michael's legal fees and support his family while he was in prison, as a gesture of forgiveness and family unity. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even after everything that had happened, even after her brother had been convicted of assaulting me, Patricia was still trying to get access to my money. She was still treating me like I owed the family something, like my resources should be available to support the very people who had attacked and betrayed me. I didn't write back to Patricia. There was nothing to say to someone who was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me responsible for fixing problems that her family had created. She had shown me who she really was during the worst crisis of my life, and I believed her. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some betrayals are too deep, some choices too revealing of character. Patricia had chosen to defend violence against me rather than stand up for what was right, and that choice had consequences that couldn't be undone with a letter full of excuses. Michael was released from prison after serving 4 months of his 6-month sentence. He called me on the day he got out, not to ask for money or help, but to ask if he could come see me. Just to talk, he said. Just to continue the conversation we had started in our letters. I said yes, but I set conditions. He could come to my house, but only for an hour. We would talk in my living room, with the doors open and my neighbor's phone number within reach. I wouldn't be alone with him in any space where I might feel trapped or threatened. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. Prison had changed him physically. He was thinner, grayer, more worn down than when I had last seen him in court. But it was more than that. There was something different in his eyes, something humble and ashamed that I had never seen there before. He sat in my living room, in the same chair where he had sat during those awful confrontations about money, and he told me about his time in prison, about the classes he had taken, the therapy he had participated in, the other inmates whose stories had helped him understand his own behavior. I met a guy in there who was serving time for beating up his elderly father, Michael said. Same story as mine, basically. The old man had money. The son thought he deserved some of it. Things escalated until someone got hurt. But this guy's father died from his injuries. He's serving 20 years for manslaughter, and he has to live with knowing that he killed his own father over money. Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes. That could have been me, Mom. If you hadn't stopped me when you did, if you hadn't shown me that there were consequences for what I was doing, I could have kept escalating until I killed you. I could have been that guy, serving 20 years for murdering my own mother over some money that wasn't even mine to begin with. The conversation was difficult, painful, necessary. Michael didn't try to minimize what he had done or make excuses for his behavior. He acknowledged that he had been consumed by greed and entitlement, that he had convinced himself he had rights to my money that he didn't actually have. He talked about the anger management techniques he had learned, about the triggers he now recognized in himself, about the warning signs that his thinking was becoming distorted and dangerous. He had developed strategies for dealing with financial stress and family conflict that didn't involve manipulation or violence. Most importantly, he understood now that my money was mine to do with as I chose. He had no claim to it, no right to information about it, no say in how I spent or saved or invested it. He was my son, and he would always be my son, but that didn't make him entitled to my resources. We talked for exactly 1 hour, and then he left. He didn't ask for money, didn't ask for help, didn't ask for anything except the chance to prove that he had changed. He gave me his phone number and told me to call him if I ever needed anything, but he wouldn't contact me again unless I reached out to him first. That was 2 years ago. In the time since, Michael has slowly, carefully, consistently shown me that his rehabilitation was real. He got a job in construction again, found a small apartment, started paying his debts, and supporting his family. He attended weekly therapy sessions even after his court-mandated treatment was finished. Most importantly, he never asked me for money, not once. Not even when his car broke down and he had to take the bus to work for 3 months while he saved up for repairs. Not even when his daughter needed dental work and his insurance didn't cover it. He found other ways to solve his problems, other sources of support, other solutions that didn't involve manipulating or pressuring his mother. We have coffee together once a month now, usually at a restaurant, sometimes at my house, always with clear boundaries and expectations. We talk about his job, his therapy, his plans for the future. We talk about my foundation work, my volunteer activities, my efforts to build a life that has meaning beyond family relationships. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about inheritance or financial planning or what will happen to my assets when I die. Those topics are off limits, and Michael respects that boundary completely. Our relationship will never be what it was before. I will never again see Michael as my innocent little boy who could do no wrong. I will always remember that he is capable of violence, always be aware that his rehabilitation could fail, always maintain the boundaries necessary to protect myself. But there is something there now that feels genuine, something that might eventually grow into a healthy adult relationship between a mother and son who have both learned painful lessons about greed, entitlement, and the importance of accountability. Patricia is a different story. She has never acknowledged wrongdoing, never apologized for her role in what happened, never taken responsibility for choosing to defend violence against her own mother. As far as I know, she still believes that I overreacted to Michael's assault, that I was wrong to press charges, that I should have handled the whole situation within the family. She sends me birthday cards and Christmas cards, always with notes suggesting that we should put the past behind us and focus on being a family again. But she never addresses the past directly, never acknowledges what actually happened, never takes accountability for her choices. I don't respond to the cards. There's nothing to say to someone who refuses to acknowledge reality, who wants reconciliation without accountability, who thinks that time alone can heal wounds that were caused by deliberate choices. My grandchildren are adults now, or nearly so. They've grown up hearing Patricia's version of events, believing whatever story she told them about why Grandma doesn't come to family gatherings anymore, why Uncle Michael went to prison, why the family fell apart. I grieve for the relationships I've lost with them, for the milestones I've missed, for the role I should have played in their lives. But I also understand that they are Patricia's children, and she has the right to make decisions about who they have contact with, even if those decisions are based on lies and manipulation. Maybe someday, when they're fully grown and independent, they'll want to hear my side of the story. Maybe they'll ask questions about what really happened, about why their grandmother disappeared from their lives. If that day comes, I'll be ready to tell them the truth. But until then, I have to accept that this is another consequence of choosing accountability over family loyalty. The Susan Hope Foundation has grown beyond anything I imagined when I first started it. We now operate 3 transitional housing facilities for women in recovery, providing not just shelter, but job training, counseling services, and long-term support for women who are rebuilding their lives after addiction. Last month, I attended the graduation ceremony for our latest job training program. 23 women who had been written off by their families, dismissed by society, and told they were hopeless cases, had completed our 6-month program in healthcare support services. They were starting new careers, moving into permanent housing, rebuilding relationships with their children. One of the graduates, a woman named Sarah, spoke about how the foundation had given her more than just job skills. "You gave me hope," she said, looking directly at me. "You showed me that someone believed I was worth investing in, worth saving, worth a second chance." That made all the difference. Sitting in that room, watching those women walk across the stage to receive their certificates, I felt a sense of purpose and pride that I had never experienced as a mother. These women weren't my biological children, but they were my family in the truest sense. They were people whose lives had been transformed by love and support, and the simple belief that everyone deserves dignity and respect. This is what my money was meant for, not to enable my children's entitlement or fund their sense of grievance, but to create real change in the world, to help people who had been forgotten and discarded by everyone else. The irony is that if Michael and Patricia had simply respected my autonomy, if they had treated me with the basic dignity that every person deserves, they probably would have inherited at least some of this money eventually. But their greed, their impatience, their willingness to use manipulation and violence to get what they wanted, had cost them everything. They had destroyed their inheritance by trying to steal it early. They had lost their mother's love by treating her as nothing more than a source of money. They had sacrificed their family relationships on the altar of their own entitlement. I don't hate my children. Hate requires too much energy, takes up too much space in my heart. But I don't trust them either, and I don't miss the versions of them that tried to manipulate and abuse me. I miss the children they used to be, before greed changed them into people I didn't recognize. I'm 70 now, and I've learned lessons about family, love, and money that I never expected to learn. I've discovered that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty or respect. I've learned that being someone's mother doesn't make you responsible for their choices or obligated to sacrifice your autonomy for their desires. Most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, to refuse to be anyone's victim, even when the people trying to victimize you are your own children. Even when standing up for yourself means losing relationships you thought were permanent. Even when the cost of dignity is loneliness. Some people think I was too harsh, that I should have forgiven Michael more quickly, that I should have worked harder to repair my relationship with Patricia. They think that family should forgive anything, tolerate anything, excuse anything in the name of love. But I've learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enabling. And forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's just permission to repeat the same harmful behaviors. I chose to protect myself. I chose to demand accountability. I chose to use my resources for good instead of allowing them to fund my children's sense of entitlement. I chose dignity over family loyalty, truth over comfortable lies, justice over keeping the peace. Those choices cost me relationships I thought I couldn't live without, but they gave me something more valuable: self-respect. The knowledge that I stood up for myself when it mattered most. The satisfaction of knowing that my life savings are being used to help people who truly need help, rather than people who simply want what they haven't earned. I sleep well at night now, not because my life is perfect or because I don't miss my children, but because I know I did the right thing. I protected myself when no one else would. I refused to be anyone's victim. I turned my pain into purpose and my betrayal into hope for others. That's not the ending I would have chosen for my family story, but it's an ending I can live with. An ending that honors the woman I've always been underneath the mother, the widow, the victim. It's an ending that proves it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand respect, to build a life that has meaning beyond what other people expect from you. I thought I was just an ordinary woman living a quiet life, but I learned that ordinary women are capable of extraordinary strength when pushed to their limits. I learned that quiet lives can become powerful statements about dignity and self-worth. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is to refuse to enable their worst impulses, even if they hate you for it. I went from being a loving mother to someone who had to fight back to protect everything I'd worked for. And in that fight, I discovered who I really was beneath all the roles I'd played for other people. I discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, braver than I'd ever believed, and worthy of respect, especially from myself. That's the story I want to tell, not a story about perfect families or unconditional love or forgiveness conquering all, but a story about an ordinary woman who found extraordinary strength when everything she believed about family was proven wrong. A story about choosing yourself when no one else will choose you. A story about turning the worst betrayal of your life into the foundation for something beautiful and meaningful and lasting. I am Martha. I am 70 years old. I am a widow, a survivor, a fighter, and a force for good in this world. And I am finally, truly proud of who I've become.